It's going back to levels of what was there in 2005, which in some ways is disappointing, but explainable, and I'll explain it in a minute. To give you some denominator on how many articles one would find in a longitudinal study about various kinds of risks, we tried to do some looking at other people's risks over time, and you're comparing apples and oranges here. It's very difficult to do, but we had about 34 articles per year if we just kind of average them all together. In one study for 7 years of 5 major newspapers, remember we had much more than that, they had 68 a year. In another study in the UK for just 2 years on cloning, they had 56 a year. In another study on antibiotic resistance, they had 91 a year. So, I mean, no matter what you look at, we're still looking at an incredibly small number of articles on potential environmental and health risks. Now, we didn't look at all the media. We certainly have not looked at, and we don't know what our next 2 years are going to bring. So this is still provisional kind of information, but it's interesting to see that I don't think we're seeing a balance in the media at all between the large numbers of very positive articles, the miracles or whatever that people have called them during the day in the media, in the newspapers, being balanced off in any way by the number of risks. One of the more interesting things that we found out when we presented some of these data in Washington, D.C., was that people in the nano community were absolutely shocked at how few articles there were, because they read the web. And so do I, and so do you. And so we look at nano work, and we look at this, and we look at all the web magazines, and we look at all the listservs we're on, and we get all this information, and we think, boy, there is a ton of information out there for the public to learn more about nanotechnology, and why aren't they learning? Why don't they know? Well, to tell you the truth, there is not a ton of information out there in the media at all about nanotechnology, about its risks in any effect. And I don't think in the long run, 3,600 articles over 7 years, well, that may not be bad. I don't have a comparison to it, but I still don't think that nanotechnology is a very dominant topic in the media, whether it's positive or negative. Let's go to one more slide. So we've seen the risks change over the years, the type of risks. We've moved away from the runaway science. We've moved to much more specific information on environmental health and societal risks. We're now seeing a rise in government regulation coverage, and we've seen the coverage of scientific studies decreasing in 2005 and 2006. And I actually think that decrease in scientific studies is quite explainable by traditional media coverage behavior related to scientific subjects. And that is whether you're a science reporter or a general reporter, but particularly a general reporter, it's easier to cover regulation discussions than it is to write about complex and uncertain scientific studies. The regulation debate is also involves credible groups and scientists that the reporters recognize and know are good sources. Covering scientific studies, they're talking to unknown scientists who occasionally do a tox study, and they have no idea whether this is really good science or not. And in addition, a lot of the nano studies are not published in what science writers consider to be the main scientific journals, Science, Nature, although there is Nature Nanotech, Cell, the Journal of the American Medical Association. I mean, those are Bibles for science writers, and they look at them on a weekly basis. And so a lot of the stuff in the Journal of Nanoparticle Research and so on just wouldn't be reaching the science writers, and certainly not general assignment reporters. So it's really kind of easy to see why regulatory issues would be would rise up rather quickly rather than the science. Now, I do have to say that we are in the years, unfortunately, of media convergence, and I don't mean that, unfortunately, in convergence, but that we are losing newspapers right and left. Dietram told us yesterday about the loss of both Rick Weiss and Barnaby Feeder. There's also Charles Choi, who was the science writer who wrote for the UPI series. And that also may be partially responsible for the drop in coverage. So we're going to be looking at that more carefully as well, and in the spring of 2009 do some qualitative interviews with some of these reporters and their editors and try and find out exactly what's going on and whether it's the topic of nanotechnology risk or whether it's the impact of what's going on in newspaper space and time on television that's making the impact and causing the loss of coverage. Thank you very much.